Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Policy and Resources Committee. Just a normal reminder that the meeting's been recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. Do we have any apologies or substitutes?
Yes, Convener, an apology from Councillor Boyd, with Councillor Cheap substituting.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest or statements of transparency? Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 3, minute of previous meeting. Do we agree that this is an accurate minute of the meeting? Thank you. Next item is Capital Monitoring General Fund Capital Programme 23-24, and I'll pass over to Mr Lorimer. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, elected members. This report shows the actual expenditure, actual capital expenditure incurred to the end of October and a projection for the remainder of the financial year. The variances compared to budget are fairly small overall. There's an underspend on the net capital budget of about 874,000. Currently being projected. The report advises that the implications of Storm Babbitt are not included in the figures at this stage, but I do plan to bring, as you might have read in the report, an update on the financials around Storm Babbitt to the Council meeting on the 14th of December. The report is seeking approval on two aspects. Firstly, a change in the phasing of the Arbroath Places for Everyone project. That's to reflect the start on site in January, as was agreed at the Special Council in October. And the second recommendation, which is seeking approval to use £20,000 from the capital contingency to address a major road defect in Sylvie Way on the Orchard Bank industrial estate. I do have to apologise. There's a couple on page 15 within the report. There is a couple of reasons, narratives, commentary in relation to the variances, table 6 actually of that report, in relation to roads and transportation, where the commentary has TBA. I can advise that in relation to the carriageway, footway projected overspend there of 309,000, that's due to the advancement of some repair works from 24-25 into the current year. Some of that might now be impacted by the diversion of resources off to deal with storm repairs. But that was the projection at that time. And the second TBA within that table in relation to the Arbroath Water Flood Prevention Scheme, that's due to the finalisation of the land compensation payments, which are expected now to cost more than had originally been budgeted for. So that's an edited highlights, Convener. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Lorimer, you've already mentioned about the £20,000, which is on page 16 of the Combined Papers, section 8, to help bring that road up to an adoptable standards and for some repair work. So I presume that repair work involves, and I'm reluctant to use the words pothole, but rather than crater, that is sort of right in the middle of the road between the entrance to Angus House and to the Shell garage. So there's a two-part question. So is that the works that's going to be done there? And then the second part is, am I correct in thinking that £20,000 is going to be committed by the Angus Council, with a further £20,000 committed by Muir Group? So is that £40,000 to fill a hole?
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. Yes, in answer to the first question, yes, it is no longer a hole. It is a very, very significant defect within the road that you've obviously spotted if you've been driving around that area. The projection is that it would be a £40,000 cost in total, not just to fill the hole. And I'm not a roads engineer, so please bear that in mind. But the actual area around that hole in the road is also in need of work. So it'll actually be quite a significant repair. There are also repairs required at the junction at the other end, which will also be part of that work.
Any further questions? Councillor Wan.
Just a quick one, Ian, on the back of that. Why is Angus Council responsible for that road there? Is it, if it's not adopted, is it not the developers? I know he's putting 20,000 in. I presume yours were the developer.
Yeah, the land at Orchard Bank, it goes back some years. It was there's a joint development agreement between the council and Muir Group, different names used over the years. And because the road hasn't yet been adopted, we as the landowner from an economic development point of view, along with the developer, in this case Muir, we are responsible for the road at this stage, and that's why we're proposing to deal with it in the way that's described in the report.
And that gets the to adoptable standard, and it will then be adopted straight after that.
The intention is that the repair would be to an adoptable standard. There is a broader question in terms of next year's budget around the adoption of all the roads on the Orchard Bank Industrial Estate, but that would be a matter for next year's budget.
Any further questions? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Again, Mr Lormer, page 15 of the combined papers, table 5. With regards to the upgrade and extension to the welfare facility for waste depot, in the commentary it mentions that the project cost is substantially over budget and the design is being reviewed. Can you give any further explanation as to what has caused that substantially over budget nature? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know the detail. I think what's happened is that the original proposal and design, when that has gone out to tender, it's come back over budget. So we're not in a position to take the project forward, and that's why it's been delayed and is being redesigned. But I can speak to the relevant budget holder and get you that further information on the detail for that one.
Thanks. Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I just wondered if someone could confirm as an adaptations budget will be spent this year, given the ongoing backlog with occupational therapists. And also wondered if anyone could confirm how much has and will be spent this year on open market acquisition. You know, how many properties is that likely to equate to? And I appreciate that it's still very unknown in terms of the costings of the storm, but I just wondered whether that would have an impact on open market acquisition spend going forward within other areas, including Arbroath, to meet needs.
Can you answer that, Ian?
Convener, unfortunately, Councillor Speed, I don't know the detail around the aids and adaptations budget, nor actually the position in detail on the open market acquisition. So I would need to speak to the relevant budget holders on that and come back to you separately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Gavin, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Convener, and good afternoon, members. It was just to give Lois the assurance that yes, the aids and adaptation budget will be spent over and over again this year. We are catching up on the backlog. Some slippage in the housing capital plan have allowed us to bring forward many of those cases. So I can update you on that out with the meeting, but just to give you that assurance.
Much. Councillor Braze.
Yes, thanks. And this is just for clarification, more for anyone else who's viewing. But when it comes to the welfare facility at the Forfar Waste Depot, I think it's extremely important to remember that these people are out working in all weathers, in the roughest of weather. On the morning Storm Babbitt, I had my bin emptied about 10 o'clock in the morning in the teeth of a gale and driving rain. And it's extremely important that these people, our staff, have somewhere warm and comfortable and dry when they finish their shift. And if it's important for staff in schools to have somewhere comfortable, it's even more important for our outdoor workers. So I just wanted the reassurance that this will go ahead.
Yeah, thanks again through you, Convener. Councillor Braze, yes, absolutely. We're very much aware of the need to improve those facilities. So it's really it has been in the plan, I think, for a year or two. So those works definitely need to be done. It's finding an affordable way to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any comments? No. Okay, we'll move to recommendations. We're asked to review and scrutinise the expenditure and, as described by Mr Lormer, approve the revision to the budget and the allocation of £20,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, move on to the next paper, which is the Revenue Monitoring 2023-24 and Renewal and Repair Fund position. And we'll go back to Mr Lorimer.
Thank you again, Convener. This is the revenue budget equivalent of the report we've just looked at in relation to capital, again based on actual expenditure and income to the end of October and a projection for the rest of the financial year. As such, obviously, the figures are subject to change as the year progresses. The report paints what I would call a concerning picture. We're looking at a fairly significant overspend being projected across a number of service areas. Overall, some of the figures are affected by ring-fenced funding. So overall, an adjusted overspend compared to a budget of nearly £5 million is currently projected. Now, clearly that's not an acceptable position for us to be in and does require remedial action where we can. That action will mean postponing some recruitment to vacant posts. It might mean cancelling or delaying non-staff cost expenditure, which can be regarded as non-essential or non-urgent. So it's really trying to find a way of bringing that number down in as least impactful a way on service, etc., as possible. So that work is now underway. We're also going to do a detailed review of the spend and the projections that we have within the report, and a review of some of the assumptions, and that will be done for the next version of this report, the next monitoring report. That next monitoring report will be used to inform the position for the 24-25 budget setting, so is important from that point of view. And just to be clear, that the overspend that's projected here, it's not due to the additional costs from Storm Babbitt. So that will be covered by in a separate report. It's largely down to the impact of rising demand in some service areas, the impact on costs from inflation in particular. We have been battered financially over the last 18 months by very high inflation, and we're seeing some of that coming through in this report. As members will have probably seen recently in the press, the 23-24 staff pay deal for non-teaching staff has now been agreed by all trade unions, and the cost of that final deal is not captured in this version of the report, but we will capture that in the next monitoring update report, which will come forward in January. And again, happy, Convener, to take any questions on the report.
Thank you. Clearly a very challenging situation. Do we have any questions? Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Just looking on page 43 of the combined papers, under infrastructure, environment, property costs, specifically with roads, and the deficits on electric vehicle energy charging costs. It states here in brackets that the total costs incurred are not being met by income received from users. Is that because we're not charging enough for the electric, or because there aren't enough users physically using them?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gregg. That's one of the areas I want to have a look at in detail in terms of the assumptions that are being made. Is it because we're not charging it enough, or is it because there's a lack of usage and we'll have an element of fixed costs? I suspect it's the latter, but I don't know that for sure, and that's one of the things I want to have a detailed look at in discussion with colleagues in roads. And if that does mean we need to make some revisions to the charges, then that's what we would bring proposals back in relation to that, because we shouldn't be subsidising that activity.
Thank you. Councillor Bland.
Just a quick one on that, Ian. That's not the question I want to ask, but electric cars, I seem to find an electric charging point no problem in Angus, which is good for me. Mine's 100% electric, so it probably is something to do with maybe a lack of electric cars at the moment. And just as a comparison, petrol's still a lot cheaper than using electric, unfortunately. It comes up with an analysis on that Charge Scotland about electric you use. So I don't know how quick this is going to change. I love my electric car, but whether or not that position will change. My question actually, thanks Chair, is on the MEB waste contract gain share and the deficit of 2.3 million on that one. Can you get a bit more explanation on? I know it gives you some kind of narrative there on why, but when we agreed to all these, I think it was going to be a good positive step for us to do this year, and it seems to be now causing a little bit of an issue, and I know some of it's to do with inflation, but could you maybe just explain that a bit better for us? Thank you.
Yeah, through you again, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Vaughan. Yeah, that one's a particularly complex one. So thinking back to last financial year, because of high energy prices and because of throughput through the plant, we did particularly well in relation to the share of excess income over and above what had been allowed for within the contract. Now, we had hoped that additional income would continue, and we budgeted on that basis for the current financial year. Unfortunately, that is not how things have panned out. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, energy prices that are being achieved in the wholesale market from the plant are much less than where they had been. Now, from the council's point of view, that's better for us in terms of our energy bills. But it doesn't help us in terms of the gain share. The gain share is still working. The contract's all still in place. It's really just about the level of income that is coming through the contract that is then available to share. So a reduction in energy costs is a factor. There have also been additional plant unavailability issues this year in comparison to last year. And if the plant's not available to the same extent, it's not processing the same levels of third-party waste. It's still processing all of ours and Dundee's waste, but it's the waste capacity over and above that that's impacted. So those factors are significant in terms of the impact on the gain share. We took a little bit of a risk in terms of assuming that level of income could be sustained, and essentially that risk has not panned out for us, and that is now effectively a budget gap in the current year, and is likely to remain a budget gap into next year as well.
Thanks. Councillor Braze.
Yes, just following on from that question, what are our expectations of the availability position going forward?
Thanks, Councillor Braze. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think there, as I understand it, I'm not close to the detail. There have been additional outages this year planned in terms of maintenance, etc., to improve the longevity and the operation of the plant. Whether that will continue to the same extent next year, I don't have a handle on, but I can consult with Mr Daly and colleagues on that to confirm.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just to clarify, and I'm sure Mr Lorimer could answer this one, low energy costs are good news for the council on a net basis, correct?
Absolutely, Councillor Duff. The one word of caution I would add to that is that the arrangements in relation to the gain share, it's more or less what's the best way to describe that? It's real time in terms of the energy that's sold. The purchase of energy by the council in terms of our gas and electricity needs, etc., is done as part of a national arrangement with Scottish procurement. A lot of the energy that is bought through that contract is forward purchased. So there is a delay. There was a time lag in terms of when energy prices went up, but there's then also a delay in terms of when energy prices come down. But to answer your question, yes, lower energy costs is a good thing.
Councillor Braze.
Sorry, Convener, but just on that, the gain share through high energy prices doesn't exactly marry up in time with what the council's paying.
No, Councillor Braze.
For energy.
Sorry, it doesn't marry up in time, and it doesn't marry up in financial value either. We pay far more in terms of our core energy costs than we'll ever get back in a gain share. So that's why lower energy costs in net terms would be a good thing, and let's hope that's how they continue to move.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Any comments? Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. And I think Mr Lorimer has outlined the concerning deficit, and certainly I'm very pleased to see that he's taking immediate action to try and minimise that going forward. And clearly, as those of us who've been to the budget meetings can see, the situation going forward is not particularly good. And the same issues that are hitting this year will hit next year, which is the ongoing inflation. So anything we can do to minimise the overspend this year is very welcome and has my full support. Clearly, we have got to the implications of Storm Babette on top of everything else, so it's not a particularly rosy picture going forward, but we need to do what we can do to minimise our expenditure.
And on that happy note, we'll move to the recommendations. We're asked to review and scrutinise the content of the report and note the options to try and reduce the scale of the deficit and note the renewal and repair fund position. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 6 and the update on plans, budget preparation and progress. Back to Mr Lorimer.
Thanks again, Convener. Yeah, this report just gives a brief update on progress with the preparation of the 24-25 revenue and capital budgets. You'll see from the report preparation work is now well underway and running according to the timetable in Appendix A of the report. The next significant event in the budget cycle is the announcement of the Scottish Government budget on the 19th of December, and we would expect to get confirmation of the local government grant settlement and the allocation to individual councils shortly thereafter. I am flagging within the report that while the preparation process and timetable are on track, I do have concerns about the scale of the budget gap that we're looking at the moment. That will change once we know what the grant settlement is. But at the moment, on the basis of our assumptions, we are expecting to face a significant funding gap. And that will again bring significant challenges in terms of balancing a budget for next year. Inflation and increased demand in some services, as I've mentioned in the previous report, is having a huge impact on our costs and our budgets at a level that really just can't be sustained within the current environment, the current funding environment. I really have to emphasise that impact. The plan is to bring an update on the Council's medium-term budget strategy. We bring that every year, and the plan is to bring that to Council again on the 14th of December. So I'll say a bit more about what those forward projections and next year's budget is looking like in relation to that then. But for today's report, on track in terms of the timetable and the process, but some challenging work to be done to balance the budget come sort of February, March.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Wann?
Thank you, Chair. Ian, a question for you again is, and I know we've probably mentioned this several times, and you've highlighted the fact that there's a huge concern of balance in the budget, but could you just give us a little bit of an explanation of if these costs keep providing, overspends within each of these departments, what actually happens when you don't balance the budget, or you balance the budget and then there's all these overspends that keep repeating themselves? Surely there's no money in the pot then after a year or two. So what happens to the Council then?
Yeah, we're required, as you've probably heard me say a number of times, to set a balanced budget, but we're then also required to keep that budget in balance, over the course of the year. Now, there's a number of ways to do that. Historically, we've done that through a combination of budget savings, sometimes council tax increases, and the use of reserves, and that will remain the strategy. We've agreed, for example, a 5-year reserve strategy in terms of how to balance future budgets. Every annual budget is different and brings its own unique challenges. In terms of what happens, there is no equivalent in Scotland legislatively to Section 114, which you'll have probably seen in the press in terms of a number of English councils having to issue such a notice, which is really quite a serious situation. If we were in any danger of getting to that point in Angus, then there would be a number of reports brought by me as the statutory finance officer to flag that risk well in advance of that risk arising. We do have some challenging times ahead. I will say more in relation to the report coming in December, but we are working as hard as we have always done to try and find the answers to how to balance the budget. But it is more and more difficult year on year to do that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Comments? No. Sorry, that my mic was off there. So we're agreed that this is noted. Thank you. Okay, next report is item 7, the Common Good Register for Brecon, and I'll pass on to Alison Watson for this one.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to present this update on progress with compiling a public Common Good Register of property assets for the former Royal Borough of Brecon. The report seeks approval to go out to consult in terms of the legislation on the draft register. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Beattie.
Hi there. Thanks very much for this report. One of the things that that we are quite keen on, certainly in Brecon anyway, is the rents of these properties. There's no mention of that in the report. Could we possibly have that in future, where we actually see what the current rent is and how much is being paid?
Yeah, we could certainly provide that. I don't know if Mr Lorimer knows if that's presented elsewhere in another report on Common Good. Possibly that's the case, but we can take that on board.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions? Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Perhaps if Alison Watson could maybe just clarify why we are consulting Hillside, Dun and Logie Community Council about the Brecon Common Good Fund. So just for clarity, so everyone understands why that's being done.
Yes, thank you, Convener. So the legislation requires us to consult in areas that may have historically been covered by that area. So we included several community councils whose boundaries are not currently within that area, or it was not sufficiently clear to know what the historical position was. So we thought the safest approach was to include all of those that you mentioned. So that's why we did that.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener. One of the items here, former allotment Andover Hill. A lot of the locals are saying that's been sold for housing. I had no notification of it.
Certainly on the relevant history that's provided there, that's not the records we have, but I can take that back to the solicitor who's been working on it with that information. Obviously the consultation process is ideal for this kind of feedback, and we'll take that on board, and when we come to report back we can provide an update on that. But certainly the history there is as the title deeds that we hold provide that information. But as I say, the consultation is helpful for these kind of comments and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Brays.
Yes, a comment. 28 councillors are all trustees of all the common good funds, and I think it's extremely important that they know exactly where to access such information as what the rental is for a certain property, and it all seems to be very obscure to me. And I would have hoped that once this body of work, compiling the assets of all the common good funds, a huge amount of work in that, but once that's done, it shouldn't be too difficult to compile things in an easily understood format so that councillors can go and check and find out exactly what the rent is for specific assets held by the various common good funds. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. Mine is also a comment. I understand that the work to establish what is and what isn't common good has been quite extensive and quite laborious, and is continuing to ongoing. So it was actually quite nice to actually sit and read through this and appreciate some of the history that's involved, and also some of the things that you might not have expected to have been in there turned out to be there. So it was actually quite an interesting read, which is generally quite unusual for a P&R agenda item. That aside, I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing further pieces of information that come forward, so for example for the for common good as well as for the other wards, and as Councillor Brays had mentioned it, as we are all the trustees, these ultimately do fall to us for responsibility, so I do look forward to seeing more come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further comments, move to recommendations, and these are largely for noting and agreement that the draft list is publicly consulted upon. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Next item is item 8, charging internal Angus Council care homes, and I think we've got Eunice McLennan here today for that one.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. This report is looking for 2 recommendations that we want to bring our charging policy in line with legislative requirements, and we're looking for approval to, in terms of proposed charges for our Angus Council internal care homes, that we bring our rates more in line with the cost of care, and that is a requirement that we should be working towards. You'll see in the paper that we had indicated that we were going to be doing this year after we had our last charging paper approved by committee back in March. This has the potential to impact on 30 residents who live within our internal care homes at Seaton Grove, Kinloch Care Centre and the Gables in Forfar. We have consulted with all our service users in this regard. We didn't get a huge amount of feedback. I think people accepted the fact that this was a legislative requirement. However, the 8 people did respond, and 6 have asked that we do this over a 2-year period.
Eunice, I think your mic's gone off.
I apologise. I'm not sure where I was in my chatting away quite happily to myself there. Apologies. So I'm not sure where I was, but I think I was just at that point highlighting Appendix 5. So Appendix 1 is where we are laying out the proposed increase over the next 2 years, and that was in line with the small number of feedback that we got as part of this consultation. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Wan.
It's more just a clarification. If this is a legislative requirement, why do we have to approve? Just for my stupid head, thank you.
I think perhaps because we haven't been doing this before. We weren't our charges for internal care homes weren't in line with cost, and it came from a COSLA requirement, I think, over the last couple of years. So this is us just getting in line with matters and seeking approval for that to happen.
Thank you. Any further questions? Comments? No, we'll go to the recommendations. We're asked to... Councillor Speed, beg your pardon, on you go.
I don't think you noticed it. Thank you. Yeah, Eunice, you stated that it was a fairly low number of people that returned the feedback form. It would have been still quite helpful to maybe just see some of the comments that were perhaps made, and just to get a greater sense of what people's feelings are around this, albeit, like you say, it's a legislative change. But I just wondered if you could just explain in a little bit more detail the kind of the type of impact, what that looks like kind of in reality, in practice, for service users and their families, and the type of scenario that people could be in. And is it going to be a case that there perhaps could be for those that are not self-funding? Is that going to have an impact on perhaps where they stay within later stages of life?
Well, please be assured that this will only really impact on people that can afford to pay. So we have a hardship policy that if people were really struggling through our self-funders, and I can evidence that they wouldn't be asked to pay. And as you can see, we are going to be doing it incrementally. So, you know, our position is that it's a fair thing to do, that if people can afford to pay and it's not going to have any detriment to them, then that's what we're asking people to do. It is a very small number of people, as you can see, you know, we think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
But please be clear, we wouldn't be asking people to leave accommodation if they couldn't afford it. We would look into that. That wouldn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no further comments, move to recommendations, and we're asked to have due regard to the consultation exercise and approve the proposed charges. Is that agreed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're asked to consider the possible exclusion of public and press in terms of Standing Order 28.2, and whether the public and press should be excluded during consideration of the following items, so as to avoid the disclosure of information which is exempt in terms of Part 1, Schedule 7A to the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Is that agreed? Thank you.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?